looking at a flyer of tonight's meeting. At the top of it, it is a cream graphic with a blue gradient border. It has the words Diversability, Unplugged, Disability, and Sexuality at the top of the graphic in navy font. It's above 4 roundish headshots with their pronouns underneath. We're going to start with left to right. We have Robin Wilson-Beattie, she and her, a Black woman with purple hair wearing black rimmed glasses standing on a red carpet. Spencer West, he, him, a black and white picture of a white man wearing a black shirt with a fedora and glasses. Caz Killjoy, they, them, a pale-skinned person with dark hair in front of a rainbow background. And Emerson Wheeler, they, them, a white person with freckles and light, dirty blondish hair wearing glasses. Directly below these pictures are the words, please keep your mic muted until the end. At the end of the event, we will be taking questions. And if you have any questions throughout the time, please put them in the chat and I'll make sure our moderator gets them. Directly below this are the links to our online communities. You can join the Diversability Leadership Collective and get your first week free at https://Diversability, diversability.mn.co. And you can also join our free Facebook community at https://bit.ly/Diversability Community. That's DIVERSABILITY And of course, at the very bottom, center aligned, a white Diversability logo completes our graphic. Thank you again for joining us tonight. And without further ado, let's toss it over to our moderator for the night, Whitney Bailey. Whitney, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for November's Diversability Unplugged event. Like Marie said, I'm Whitney Bailey, and I am Diversability's Director of Operations. I am a white woman with short brown hair, wearing glasses and a pink shirt, and I go by she, her pronouns. If this is your first Diversability event, Diversability is a community of people with disabilities and the people who support us, who are all on a mission to elevate disability pride together. And before we start the event, I wanted to kind of reiterate what Marie just said and ask all of our attendees to please keep their mics muted until the end of the event, and we'll open it up for questions. But if you have questions during the event, please drop them in the chat, and we will get to them. So we're gonna get into the topic of sexuality, because sexuality is such a taboo topic, especially when it comes to the disabled community. And tonight we're going to dive into this topic, and we have brought you a panel of 4 awesome individuals who are going to bring their own perspectives. I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves. And because sexuality is so diverse, tell us, what does sexuality mean to you? And Robin, do you want to go first? Oh, you're muted.
I'm mute. Yeah. Hi, I'm Robin Wilson-Beattie, she, her, and I am a disability and sexuality
I think Robin froze. Um, uh, Spencer, do you want to go until we figure out what's going on? What's going on with Robin?
Sure, no problem. Hi, folks. My name is Spencer West. I'm a motivational speaker and content creator and author. Just very quickly, I'm wearing a red sweater today. I've got a bald head and salt and pepper beard, and I'm sitting on a beautiful gray couch with some pillows behind me. What sexuality means to me, I think, is it's the way you express yourself in all aspects, whether that's through what you wear, whether that's who you choose to have sexual activities with, whether that's the language that you use or how you just present yourself in that way, or your orientation and how you identify. I think sexuality is all of those things rolled up into one. So that's what it means to me.
Awesome. Caz, do you want to go?
Yep, thank you, Whitney. I am Caz. I'm from Washington, D.C. I am the co-founder of the Disability and Sexuality Access Network, which is a group of sex educators who educate around disability. I have dark brown hair and glitter framed glasses with red sides, a black shirt, and I'm sitting in under a small room with off-white walls. So when I think about sexuality, I think about it being an expression of sexual identity and our sexual thoughts and our feelings and our behaviors, our emotions, our different ways of expressing ourselves. It can include private or secretive expression, or it can be solo expression. It can be with someone else or with multiple people. It needn't include other people, but when it does, it has to be consensual, or it's not sex, it's assault.
Awesome. Emerson, do you want to introduce yourself? I saw that you.
Yeah, hi everybody. I have the honor of speaking for Emerson. Thank you, Emerson, for letting me do this. Hi everyone, I'm Emerson. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns, and I identify as agender. I'm a medical student in Vermont. I am also a semi-speaking autistic person, and I also have physical disabilities related to Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and associated comorbidities. Sexuality is super diverse. I personally identify as asexual.
Awesome. And Robin, do you want?
Yes, sorry about that. I have no idea. It looked like, but that's a good thing. Why we have backups. Introduce myself, Robin Wilson-Beattie, what I did. And yes, sexuality it's diverse, and and like I said, it looks different for every person, because like I said, we're all individuals, and there are lots of definitions and lots of expressions of it, and I'm hoping to talk about some of those today.
Awesome. So the next question I had for everyone is, embracing your sexuality can be very liberating and exciting. What did that journey look like for you? And Spencer, do you want to go?
Sure. So my journey, what was a bit interesting. I grew up in the state of Wyoming. I currently live in Toronto, Canada now, but I grew up in Wyoming, and I grew up in the 80s. And all the messages that I was getting around me was that the only option was to be heterosexual. So that's what I presented as, and that's what I thought that I was, even though everything inside of me said something differently. And it wasn't until I was 21 that I even really identified that being gay was an option, and that is something that I actually was. I also grew up in Wyoming at a time, when there was a lot of violence towards gay people, specifically the story of Matthew Shepard. I won't get too much into it. Y'all can do your research and look up the story, but I was a senior in high school when all that happened. So everything around me told me that, and as the messages we still get today are that, being something other than heterosexual can be dangerous and wasn't an option. And so it took me a long time to come to terms with who I was and who I am. But now I'm a very out and proud gay man. So that's sort of what my journey looked like.
Cool. Hold on, Robin, do you want to answer this question?
Yes. Okay. We're talking about like our journeys in sexuality. One of those things I've learned about sexuality is expression of it, is fluid. So the Emerson had mentioned, I think it's Emerson, had mentioned, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and and had this, whole heterocentric view, like thinking about, that the world was, all like this by gender, all like very much, the male, female, that heterocentric way of thinking of this is how people are supposed to be. And I identify, and as I grew up also in the South of the United States. And so I live now in California, but I know that where my environment and where I was living, the social morals or whatever, mores and values and all of that, all of those messages I was getting, those impacted my sexuality as well, and how I define myself. I identify as heteroflexible, which is generally I am attracted to the opposite gender than what I identify as. I identify as a woman, and I find myself generally sexually attracted to males, but flexible means who knows sometimes. But I also identify as polyamorous, which means I have more than one love. I'm not monogamous. I'm non-monogamous. And that was something about sexuality, especially growing up, that the message I got was, wow, that's wrong. That's not how you're supposed to express being your sexuality. You're not supposed to have more than one relationship, or that sort of thing. So having to learn about that part of myself, and it's all been a journey, but particularly that with disability, because I am a person with multiple disabilities. I have mental illness, depression, anxiety, and PTSD from past trauma and abuse. And I acquired a physical injury, and I have a spinal cord injury, and I acquired that, back in 2004. So the expression of the sexuality or whatever, that all changed as well when my body started doing different things. So, or that presented in a different way than what I had, grown up thinking, that this is how I'm supposed to act, or how I'm supposed to behave, or what I can do. And so, kind of redefining what it meant to express my sexuality and what it meant to have sex, what all of that meant. That was all part of that process of embracing my disability, and was learning about, my sexuality. Also I have ADHD, and it wasn't even until recently that I learned about how that impacts your sexuality as well. So that's kind of been my journey, and all of those things are what led me to talking and doing the things that I do now.
Awesome. I love how you said embracing your sexuality also came with embracing your disability. It kind of went hand in hand. So that's very cool. Caz, do you want to go? Or you're on mute.
Wrong window. Thank you. I was actually very sexual from a very young age, and my parents discouraged and punished me for it, for my sexuality. And I honestly can't remember a time when I didn't embrace my sexual thoughts and feelings and desires. But due to my disabilities, I've not always been able to access those desires with partners. And this has often been more about me and the trauma I've experienced than the attitudes of other people. But despite that, I've always had a very active sex life, even without a partner, which has been a giant blessing. But in addition to that, I first came out as queer when I was 14, and I was punished for that. And I had to hide that part of myself for a very long time. Also genderqueer, and that is something that I'm very open about, but at the same time, I'm not, I guess I don't, how do I put this? As someone with a cognitive disability who has a hard time remembering other people's pronouns, if someone gets my pronouns wrong, it doesn't bother me. But I know that's not always the case with people who are genderqueer. And then, so with the ways that my disabilities interact with my sexuality, one of the things that I'm really into is kink, and that has helped me with my disabilities over the years. I'm happy to talk about that more if people are interested, but I definitely don't want to kind of cross any boundaries that people might have on that topic.
I think one thing that stood out for me, Caz, that you just said is that you've been like sexual like kind of like all your life or whatever, but you've had partners, and but you also talked about like the solo, like that's like making sure that you're pleasuring yourself. That's still part of like sexuality, and like I think that's like a stigmatized topic in itself. So yeah, so thanks for bringing attention to that. And Emerson, do you want to?
Hi, everybody. I'll be reading Emerson's answer. He says, they say, as soon, I knew I was queer in high school. As soon as I learned what the word gay was and that there were more things to be than straight, I knew who I was. I was outed to my parents during my senior year, which was really a traumatic experience for me because my parents weren't the most accepting. I actually had to help them through the mourning process on my own, which wasn't great. Even though I grew up in Boston, early on, I forced myself into some sexual situations before I knew about asexuality because I thought I was supposed to be doing things like that, not because I actually wanted to. It's liberating and exciting to choose when and with whom to have sex with, and to realize that you don't need to be pressuring yourself into encounters just because someone else wants you to, or you want to be quote unquote normal. Thank you, Emerson, for sharing that.
Thank you, Emerson, for sharing that. I think a lot of people will resonate with what you shared, because like you mentioned, there's so much pressure when it comes to sexuality that I think it's often not discussed. So I'm glad that we're doing this and opening up those conversations. So my next question, we recently shared a statistic on our social media yesterday, and it said it's from Disabled World, and it says, because of the stigma surrounding disability and sexuality, over 50% of disabled people do not have any form of a regular sex life. Why do you think there's a stigma surrounding disability and sexuality? Robin, do you want to answer this?
Yes, a lot of stigma around disability and sexuality has to deal with the attitude of society, right, towards disability. We talk about ableism, basically like discrimination and stuff against being disabled, but particularly people think of disability as something that is outside the norm, or think of it as the person as broken, and so they do not they cannot seem to conceptualize that that you are a whole person, and a part of your whole person is the fact that you are a sexual being, and that disability is just a natural part of how humans are. It's just a natural part of the of the human experience. And also sexuality is just is part of who we are as humans. It's a natural part of who we are as humans. So of course it would make sense that having a disability does that means that that doesn't mean that you aren't a sexual person, and that sexuality isn't something that you need to learn about, or that you need to discover. But what I'm trying to say is that a large part of why why it's so stigmatized has to be because of how people think about disability in the first place, and also thinking about how people tend to, when it comes to disability, sometimes they infantilize people with disabilities. In other words, treating them like they are children, are not able to be autonomous and make decisions for ourselves, concerning our sexuality. So there are a lot of there are those things that impact expressing your sexuality, but also there are also logistical things too. If you think about it, can you say you want to be able to masturbate, or be able to look at sex toys, or be able, whatever, just having that access to even get to a store that is accessible, disability friendly, those sort of things. Thinking about, if you're thinking about terms of trying to meet a partner or date, that a lot of those things involve finances, money, support, and being able to go out and access the community, and meet other people and meet them where they are, or have people come meet you. There are many things that impact people's ability, disabled people's ability to express their sexuality. And I'm sure the other panelists will come up with a lot more other things to say, but these are some of the things that I think impact that statistic.
I like how you brought up that disability and sexuality are just like they're part of life. Like sexuality is part of everyone's life. Just like disability will eventually be a part of everyone's life. So I like how you brought that up, as well as the barriers to getting like the different like resources and like equipment for sexuality, how there's like different barriers for that. Emerson, do you have your answer? I mean,
Emerson says, I'm not sure that many people are comfortable talking about sex in general, and especially when it comes to something that might seem more like a sensitive topic, like disability. I think a lot of it comes down to the language and not having the right language in your brain already when entering a sexual encounter with a disabled person, and thinking that you're supposed to know everything about the person's needs when you start. Asking questions during sex is okay. With EDS, I have to do a lot of the teaching. So making sure the floor is open to respectful questions is often my first step. My body is super particular in lots of ways, and I can easily dislocate things or injure myself if we're not careful. There is stigma already around sex, and then add in disability, and people are really uncomfortable talking about it. It's surprising to people that you can have a respectful, honest, and open conversation about what makes you both feel good. And the little moments of discomfort actually don't have a huge impact on your experience. In fact, I find it's the opposite. Once we've opened up about it and talked about it and opened up the conversation, the sex is actually better than it would have been.
I completely I loved your response. It's all about like communication with your partner. So yes, I completely agree. And those little mishaps that happen, like it brings you closer. Like so. Yeah. Spencer, do you want to answer?
Sure. I definitely echo everyone else's sentiments. I think the other thing why it stigmatizes is that we don't see it in the media. We're not represented in movies. We're not represented in TV. And so if people aren't seeing it, they're not thinking about it. And that's one of the reasons why I actually really enjoyed Ryan O'Connell's show called Special on Netflix, because it was the first time for me where I saw someone with a disability that also identified as gay having sex and having the conversation and seeing what that looks like. And if we start to normalize that a little bit, instead of constantly just seeing heterosexual sex or non-disabled or abled sex, I think then the stigma, we can reduce that number a little bit. But I think representation is a huge thing when it comes to the media and when we look at what we're all consuming. And also, I don't want to dive too deep into this, but I also think when it comes to pornography as well, looking at disabled pornography in a respectful, consensual, beautiful way, I think is something that it's hard to find if it exists. And so I think having those mediums, I think, is important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like representation does matter. And there's like a fine line between the devotees out there and what you were kind of describing, like the tasteful, like because like if we want to, it's nice to have like us represented in a major part of the sexuality industry, like you know what I mean, like so. Yes, I completely agree with and that kind of brings me to my next question. We kind of like touched on this. It's a disability and intimacy. As disabled people, our versions of intimacy may be different than what society views as conventional intimacy. So how do you go about having that conversation with your partner? I think Emerson touched on this a little bit, but Caz, do you want to share your response first?
Sure. Do you mind if I answer the last question too?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I just have a couple of different points to make. So I
Okay.
just wanted to add those in. The first being that the quote about up to 50% of adults with disabilities are not in any sexual relationship at all. I really want to know more about that quote. I want to know who they were talking to. How did these people identify? Like, I think this statistic is possibly wrong because when we think about sex and they're talking about a sexual relationship, and I believe the quote, it says a regular sexual relationship. The thing is, a regular sex life and a sexual relationship can mean very different things to different people. And I think that's a small part of the stigma regarding disability and sexuality can come from quotes like this because they're not very informative. So when non-disabled people are told that up to 50% of adults with disabilities are not in a sexual relationship, that can reinforce pre-existing feelings of aversion and objection and disgust, which can lead to an increase in rejection from non-disabled people. And additionally, we have to rethink what it means to have a sex life. Do we mean only penis in vagina sex, which is what people generally think when they say sex? And that's an ableist take on sex, as well as being heteronormative, and it erases many of us who are disabled and many of us who have LGBTQIA+ identities. Do we mean only with a recurring partner, or can we mean different relationship styles and different sexual acts, including solo activities such as masturbation or fantasy? And then I think my last point is that there's a difference between when you're disabled, trying to date a non-disabled person and trying to date a disabled person. And I've honestly had more success with dating non-disabled people because the disabled people that I've met frequently have a lot of internalized ableism. And while I think we're all disabled people, we have our needs. And then when someone else's needs don't match our needs, we can get frustrated kind of easily and say, like, this is a mismatch, and not want to have to work that out. But I think that that's a form of internalized ableism. That's really saying, like, my body is not good enough for your body, or your body's not good enough for my body. And I think that's something that we, as disabled people, need to work on, is this dialogue and this understanding of one another, and willingness to make modifications and willingness to change the way we think and the way we behave so that we can be involved with other people with disabilities.
I love how you how you kind of flipped the script on it, and like you gave your own, or a different perspective. They got us all. They can get people thinking. So I love that. I'm gonna, since I jumped the gun with the last question, I'm gonna read the question again, and I'm gonna read the next question again. And it's centered around disability and intimacy. It's, as disabled people, our versions of intimacy may be different than what society views as conventional intimacy. How do you go about having that conversation with your partner? And Spencer, do you want to take this? And we'll give Caz a break.
Sure. I think for me, this is something that I've had to learn over the years. Before, I just thought you could sort of jump in and you would figure out as you go. And there were some experiences where that worked for me. But for the most part, what I have found as I've gotten older is the importance of having the dialogue first. And before anything happens, being very clear about how my body works. I forgot to mention earlier, for those that maybe are blind, that I don't have any legs. So navigating my body is a little bit different. My legs are amputated just below my pelvis. And so for me, what I found is that when it comes to intimacy is being able, and Emerson already touched on this a little bit too, where they said, having that conversation before. And when you have that conversation, I think you can actually get to a deeper level of intimacy when you can very clearly express your needs and your desires and your wants, and also very clearly can listen to your partner and reciprocate on those things for your partner's body as well. So this is something that I'm constantly learning and pushing myself outside my comfort zone to have the conversation first, if possible, before consensual activity starts.
That's a good piece of advice, is to have the or perspective is to have the communication first before intimacy starts. Robin, do you want to answer this question?
Actually, no, because I'm listening and I was like, that's right. What I would have said something along the same lines that Spencer was talking about the communication, about needs and desires. But you also asked something about, I forgot. Can you repeat what you asked about intimacy?
I just shared that as disabled people, our versions of intimacy may be different than what society views as the conventional intimacy. And then I asked, how do you go about having that conversation with your partner?
Oh, well, yeah, that is, just kind of opening up and talking about that. And, but more in talking about that, but explaining, how this is, viewed, how you view, this activity or act or whatever as intimacy, and also, I guess communicating why or how it makes you feel, and that sort of thing.
Awesome. Emerson, do you want to answer this?
They say intimacy is so many things to me. As I've become more physically disabled, I've discovered that many seemingly little things are actually hugely intimate moments for me. Things like getting a massage from my partner on a high pain day, getting help showering when my shoulder is dislocated, helping make food for each other. In general, accepting help is a very intimate thing, and it makes me feel really close to my partner. Intimacy is not just sex. And also, there is such a persuasive societal thing that you need to finish for it to be sex. My disabilities take so much energy, and sometimes we're both just too tired to finish. But that doesn't mean it's not sex.
I completely agree. Intimacy is not just sex, and so yes, I completely agree with what you just said. Caz, do you want to answer this?
Yep, thank you. I actually want to build on what Emerson was saying about intimacy and it being a form of access, that if you feel vulnerable, or let me rephrase that, if you feel you can be vulnerable enough with your partner, the type of intimacy that you can have with them changes. So when I get to know someone, I'm really upfront about my disabilities, including my current limitations and abilities. And I emphasize what I can do and what I like to do and what I have trouble doing and what I just absolutely cannot or won't do. So for me, intimacy in a relationship, but also involves a lot of caregiving on behalf of my partner. So I make sure to discuss how frequently that happens and what my needs are during those times. When we have that type of conversation, I make certain that the other person knows that they can be my lover without being my caregiver. But then our time together will be limited because I still need my care needs met from other people. And so from the beginning, I make certain that folks know that I practice consensual non-monogamy, and that helps spread intimacy among many partners. And this helps my partners meet needs that I can't fulfill with other partners. And it helps me access all the different forms of intimacy that I want and need without burning out one partner.
So I think it's important what you said, that it's important to be upfront with your partner about everything, like just well, if you feel comfortable just laying it out all on the table. Yeah, I think that's you brought up some very important topics. All right. Moving on to the next question, we've kind of talked about, we've kind of like hinted at this throughout the conversation, but it's about misconceptions when it comes to disability and sexuality. So what are some misconceptions that you've experienced regarding sexuality and disability? Emerson, do you want to go first?
Let's give Emerson some time to write out his answer, and let's come back.
Okay.
Write out their answer, and we'll come back to them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. Spencer, do you want to go?
Sure. I think we've touched on this a bit, of just the idea that disabled folks are sexual and do want to engage in sexuality, regardless of whether that's with a partner or solo play, as well as Caz so beautifully mentioned multiple times. Even I forget sometimes that is also a form of sexuality. I think for me, if I just speak from my own personal perspective for a second, I think people assume for me, because I don't have any legs, I'm also not able to have sex, or that I don't have a penis. And that I find super frustrating. And I also find that I get a lot of questions about that as well, which for me, I don't always want to answer to strangers. I don't want to talk about my penis to a stranger. And so those are the sort of the things that I experience as an individual. Now, if this is a partner that I'm interested in sexually and all those sorts of things, then I'm happy to have the conversation. But for me, I think those are some of the things that I experience personally with my disability and not having any legs.
To me, it seems like there's a part of the society where they think they can ask us anything because we're an open book, and that's not the case. Robin, do you want to answer?
When I was, when we were sitting there talking about, like myths and misconceptions, I also think that, people also have misconceptions based on how like your disability presents. I do notice that when I am using a wheelchair, I get different kinds of, like the questions, or I get talked to differently, or people feel like they can ask me even more intimate things than they should. Like, for instance, in inappropriate times. Like, for instance, I have a story. I was at an airport going through TSA, and I was with my husband at the time and my baby. And I was in a wheelchair. The TSA agent, when, because they asked if anyone was with you, traveling with you. And I was like, yes, my husband and my baby. Her look was sheer amazement. And she looked at me, looked at him, and she goes, "You can have sex?" And she goes, and then she says, "Do you get wet down there?" And I'm going, inappropriate. But, to myself, but I remember I was so shocked that this person felt it was okay to ask this. I answered, but that was also years ago. Now, I might have a different approach, but this is the sort of thing, I noticed though that if I'm using a cane or a walker, I get different treatment based on whatever mode of, mobility device I'm using. So I imagine, and not just even imagine, but I do see that people feel they have various different kinds of myths and misconceptions, but also about myths and misconceptions about who is interested in a person and a person's ability to, or, to date or to meet people or to, have, be attracted or have people be attracted to them. Those are lots of misconceptions and about, that sort of thing. It just, and there's a lot more, but I find that a lot of it has to deal with people are very, very, very concerned and have a lot of illogical ideas about how people's bodies work, or or how sexuality works, for people. Because I think a lot of times people are thinking of, when they think about sex, they're thinking of penetrative sex as a definition of sex, which of course is ridiculous, as we've been talking about. That's kind of those are some of the things and that I've encountered or heard from other people, or also like in my research and finding out. But yeah, that sort of thing. But also misconceptions about people's interest in having sex as well. There are also, misconceptions around, certain disabilities. Like sometimes people will act like people are hypersexual due to certain cognitive or learning disabilities or some things. Sometimes people say that because and the reason I'm mentioning that is because I've been going through curriculum looking at what's known as special education curriculum, and and the things that teachers feel that are important, like thinking that someone with cognitive disabilities are just going to have their hands in their pants. And that the reason why I'm saying that is because there literally was a presentation called "Keep Your Hands Out of Your Pants." And so I was just like, wow, okay, this is wonderful that you're assuming that this is exactly the behavior that people are going to be participating in. But there's many misconceptions and things, and some of them are also it could be intersectional as well, with talking about like your gender, and sometimes people want to throw race in there as well. So and I know I'm talking a lot, but I'm sure there are other things that the other panelists will have to say.
You said some very good like key points, and one thing that keeps is like a reoccurring theme with misconceptions regarding disability and sexuality is assumptions. It's society's assumptions that regarding disability, and those assumptions are more than likely not true. But so it's important to have like conversations like this and like to educate people. Caz, do you want to answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. I want to touch on what Robin was talking about curriculum and education. And so Jessica L just said in the chat, I think we're also taught wrong about disability in school, if at all. And that's what I really want to talk about, is these misconceptions come from lack of education. And when we're in school, we get very little, if any, accurate sex education. And then we get no education about disability. I've taught to medical students who they're in their like third year and they're already on, doing hospital rounds, and they get one lecture on sex and disability, and it's not even a required attendance at lecture. So people, if they show up, they're on their gadgets, they're not really paying attention. And it's really unfortunate because without this education, people make assumptions and people have, they can be really rude. Like if a small child comes up to me and says, "Why are you using this?" like a wheelchair or a walker or whatever it may be, I'll answer the small child. But if it's an adult, the adult needs to have a better reason than just curiosity for me to answer. And the education needs to be more, not just in school, but in popular culture. We need to be represented more. We need to be represented in a way that is not dehumanizing and in a way that accurately depicts like scenes of love and scenes of sex and the scenes of conversations about these things that we have as disabled people, so that it becomes it normalizes it. It becomes something that people know about, and they don't have to wonder very inappropriate things and make very inappropriate questions that they're not just insulting, they're dehumanizing and they're hurtful when we get questions like that. And I find that I'd rather have the questions than the remarks, though. The questions are at least coming from a place of curiosity, whereas the remarks are coming from a place of judgment. And judgment also comes from that lack of education.
I couldn't agree more. I kind of like Spencer was saying, representation does matter. Like, so yeah, Emerson, do you want to answer the question?
Yeah, Emerson says, something I hear all the time is that autistic people don't want sexual relationships or any relationships at all. It's an interesting intersection of things because asexuality is also more common in autistic people than the general population. So people might assume there's some truth to the autistics don't have sex thing, but it's definitely not the case. Aces can't have sex drives is also a common misconception, one that I've had to navigate for many times. For a long time, I thought I experienced sexual attraction, but I eventually realized that was what everyone else was calling sexual attraction. I thought was just that they were saying was that the person is aesthetically pleasing to look at. That was quite a realization. I've encountered a lot of misconceptions around asexuality, specifically in med school. But I do feel that my school has done a decent job of teaching us how to ask respectful questions around sex and sexuality whenever talking to patients. However, there was no mention of disability in any of our sexuality-based teaching sessions.
I was muted. That kind of brings me to my next question, Emerson, and that's centered around the inadequate healthcare related to sexual health and disability, because oftentimes the question says oftentimes disabled people are thought of as not being sexual, so we are not given the proper resources to sexual health. Have you ever encountered inadequate healthcare related to sexual health, and what should someone do in that situation? Caz, do you want to go first?
Thank you. So when I was younger, I had a sexual health provider, and I should state I was a teenager. So this is quite frequently in human development. This is when we're first going to a sexual health provider and we're curious, but we don't really know a lot about sexual health. My sexual health provider didn't share any educational information with me, and then slut shamed me when I asked to be tested for STIs, sexually transmitted infections. But eventually I learned to speak up for myself, which as someone with severe social phobia and anxiety at the time was painfully scary for me to do. And so that's why I now have a healthcare proxy. And a healthcare proxy allows you to legally designate someone to advocate on your behalf and to make healthcare decisions for you in circumstances that you decide upon. It's not a conservatorship, it's completely different. If you're under a conservatorship, though, you can't designate your own healthcare proxy. But if you can designate one, the paperwork to do so is usually available on your state's, if you're in the United States, the state government websites, usually from the medical board. And I found these to be really, really helpful for me in a lot of different scenarios, not just around sexual health. But my healthcare proxy is actually a sex educator and a nurse. So that has really benefited me in situations where I have not felt comfortable or have just been unable to discuss certain issues.
I love how you brought up the fact that you can get a healthcare proxy to like advocate for your needs. Spencer, do you want to answer the question?
Sure. I'm really grateful that I've had sort of two experiences. When I was younger and becoming a teenager, I had a really incredible urologist who was very kind and very made sure that I had all the information that I needed and asked the right questions and asked about my body in a respectful way. And I was really grateful to have that sort of care because I know that care doesn't exist everywhere. But then when I got into my 20s and actually started having sex with other partners, I had some questions, and there were a few things that my body was doing at the time that I wasn't sure about. And I remember asking just my general practitioner a couple of questions, and they were shocked that I was even having sex, and I saw the shock on their face, like, oh, I didn't even think this is something you were engaging in. And then I experienced homophobia, where they were like, well, this specific issue doesn't matter because you're not going to have kids, so I don't think we need to explore it. And so not only were people shocked about my disability, but then I was dismissed because of my orientation. So I think those are the two experiences that I've had, and similar to Caz, what I've had to learn is I've had to learn to stick up for myself, and I've had to learn to ask the questions. And I think a proxy is a really beautiful option. I didn't know that was a thing for folks that aren't comfortable asking those questions or able to do it in the first place. So that's sort of the experience that I had, and so now I look for a doctor that I can ask these questions up front with, and if they can't answer them, then I'll try to get a referral to someone else. And also, just as an FYI too, I've done a lot of therapy to work on my internalized ableism, and oftentimes therapists, if you have access to them, they have great options and referrals for doctors when it comes to sexual health and queer identity and disability as well. So just
That's another great resource that I wasn't even thinking about is the therapist they could help you navigate those areas. Robin, do you want to answer?
Oh yeah. When it comes to, okay, we're talking about like your healthcare. Now I have realized that, okay, you know, we've talked about intersectionality, where your identity impacts your experience in the community. Well, I am a Black woman, and those, two of my intersecting identities have been Black. I'm a woman, and I have a disability. When my experience and other Black women and stuff, which is why we've been talking about, because our reproductive health care is bad in this country. We are not treated the same, and we don't experience the same level of healthcare and attention than other people who are not Black women. However, okay, and so I have personally experienced that on the reproductive end. When I was pregnant, first trimester, and I became physically disabled due to having to have surgery inside of my spinal cord for congenital birth defect. I had a doctor the doctor that was admitting me into the rehabilitation center. It was an older white man. And he looked at me, my body, looked at me kind of up and down with disgust, and said, because, he saw I was pregnant, and he goes, if you knew you were going to be like that, pointing to my body going up and down, why didn't you use birth control or something? Yeah. So basically trying, and and other when people when trying to have kids or whatever, they have their reproductive health care, they get a lot of ableist backlash and pushback about when it comes to having children. I mean, we can sit there and talk about eugenics and societies, all the laws that they had around people with disabilities and controlling their bodies so that you could not have kids or reproduce. And that's still being done today, by the way. And another thing though, but I realized that, but this is where we're talking about the intersectionality, because it's not just things like it's not just like race or your gender, but as Spencer had mentioned, also your sexuality, your sexual orientation, all of those things, all of those different identities are going to impact your experience in getting healthcare and getting sexual healthcare. So I found that I had to be very proactive in taking charge of, being involved in my healthcare decisions. But it also meant that I look at, the relationship that I have with a clinician or a doctor or whatever. It's a relationship of sorts. So if I can work with, either if I can't work with you, if your attitude or how you feel about me or my body or, disability, if you can't seem to understand that or learn or whatever, then I'm going to find another physician, to work with. However, I do realize that that's not, something that an ability that everyone has, depending on like what providers they have access to. But I found that I am, as far as selecting doctors, I look at when they graduated from medical school, because I have found that for me, I had a harder time. I found that a lot of some of the ingrained like ableist ideas towards bodies were the people who were not more open to hearing about different things. They tended to be a lot older. And so even though I know that this sounds like I'm being age discriminatory, I've had to, because of based on my experience of dealing with elderly white men in my healthcare and it being detrimental to me, I don't select. My medical team is comprised, of people that I feel can understand or listen to my experience and my body. And, you know, I just think that also, you know, we were talking about like the healthcare proxies. I also having an ally. I had, you know, when I was sitting here trying to figure out and trying to get help and things like that before I, you know, could, you know, in those times where it's harder for me just to self-advocate, having that ally, as I told my husband at the time was a white male. And I was like, look, I got to use your white British privilege, basically, because they'll listen to you where they are not listening to me. And even if you're just in the room, I feel like I'm being more supported and I have a better outcome, which, you know, it is. But I felt that I you know, so there are, you know, if you can go that professionally, but you can also, you know, like finding that healthcare proxy, but you can also, you know, an ally. And I found, you know, an ally to be very helpful as well.
Awesome. One thing I took from your response is like you can pick and choose your healthcare team. If it's not working out for you, you can go to another person. Like it's if you don't just pick one and stick with them. Like if you don't like their advice or what have you, you can go get a second opinion or yeah. So, Emerson, do you want to answer this?
Hi. Emerson says, I haven't encountered this blatantly as a patient. I'm blessed to have found a wonderful primary care provider who knows and respects me deeply. However, as a medical student, I see this all the time. Attendings are shocked when I ask sexual health questions in patient interviews with disabled folks, especially intellectually disabled folks. I always have to be the one questioning their assumptions for them, which is annoying and risky as they're also the ones grading me. I also feel super strongly that we need to be teaching non-disabled people that disabled people have sex. And we also really need to be teaching disabled people about consent. With the overlap with autism, it's especially important to me to be teaching people to respect their own boundaries. Autistic people are constantly letting the world cross their own personal boundaries just because of the way the world is set up and how sensitive most of us are to sensory stimuli. We aren't used to honoring and respecting our own boundaries at all, and it feels uncomfortable for us to assert them. I will also say that the homophobia, transphobia, and ableism in medicine is part of the reason why I'm taking some time off from medical school to get my MPH. It's why there are so few openly disabled doctors. We don't make it through training. We are beaten down over and over again until we give up fighting the injustices that we see.
Thank you for sharing that, Emerson. There's so much to say about that, and I think one of the common themes is that there's so much. It's not just disability that's being like stigmatized and everything. So I think everyone's story here is going to resonate with those watching this. I wanted to make sure that we had time for question and answer. But one of our last questions is it has to do with giving advice. What advice would you give to someone who wants to explore their sexuality but is intimidated by the topic, or may just not know where to start? Does anyone want to chime in on that really fast before we go to the question and answer?
I will. This is Caz.
Okay.
I generally suggest that people start with the website Scarletine. That's SCARLETEEN.com. While the site is made for teens and emerging adults, it has medically accurate information and it's socially sound. I can't find anything wrong with this website and its information. It's beautiful. I'm going to drop a link into the chat that goes to their series of articles by S.E. Smith that are dedicated specifically to disability and sexuality. And then there are a few books that I recommend people start with. The Quick and Easy Guide to Sex and Disability by A. Andrews. It's really short, and it's illustrated, basically like a graphic novel. Queers on Wheels by the author was Eva Sweeney, but it's now I believe it's now Evan Sweeney. But if you need to look it up, it's under Eva. Kissability, which is people with disabilities talk about sex, love, and relationships. And then if you're into something a little bit longer, there's the Ultimate Guide to Sex and Disability by Miriam Kaufman and Corey Silverberg and Fran Odette. And these are really great jumping off point. And I'll put the, I don't have links for the books, but I'll put the name of the books into the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Caz, for those resources. And I think Emerson has answered this question. Do you want to share the response?
Yes, Emerson says, I guess my advice would be to not be afraid to play around with yourself, with toys, with others, etc. I guess I'm giving a non-answer. If you don't know where to start, just start. It doesn't matter where, just that you do. If it feels scary, I find it helpful to come up with things to say and practice saying them. For example, when I do things with people, particularly sexual or intimate things, I find that lots of people end up making assumptions without meaning to. I have one request for you, and that is you try to catch your assumptions. If you feel yourself making an assumption about something I can or cannot do, feel free to just ask. You could just ask me, oh, hey, my brain just assumed you wouldn't like it if I touched you there. Is that a fair assumption?
I think that's great. I think that's great advice to bring this to a close regarding a disability and sexuality. We have about 15 minutes left in the event. I'd like to open the floor to question and answer. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, or we can just go from the chat. If anyone has any questions for the panelists, feel free to ask them now.
Whitney, our first question came for a question for Spencer from Adria, they, them. Do you feel that the forced idea of heterosexuality caused mental health issues that you still deal with today?
This is a good question. For me in particular, I don't think that affected me as deeply because I feel really grateful that part of the privilege of when I came out is that my family was very accepting. And so I had a positive space to explore and to grow. So I don't know if the heteronormativity of the world affected my mental health in that regard. But I think the intersection of my disability and being queer has definitely caused some things that I've had to explore myself in therapy, and having professional help is what helped me for that. Again, I recognize that that's also a privilege that I have access to those things. But for me, that's been my experience. My actual orientation itself, I didn't have a lot of mental health issues in regards to that.
Brady, what do you want to read another question if nobody?
Yeah, of course. So our next question, we've had a few questions about sex work. Multiple people really wanted to hear about how it relates to disability. It seems like a lot of disabled people might have to turn to sex work to either survive or either just have some taste of sexuality in this ableist society. So if any speakers would love to speak about that, our audience really wants to know more about it.
I'm happy to talk about that. This is Caz. I've been a sex worker, and it has, there's so much I could say about it, and there's so little time. Basically, the most people that I've known who have been sex workers have been disabled in some way, shape, or form. It might not be something that they've been public about, but it's something that sex work can pay so well that you don't necessarily need to rely on another job or on benefits. And you can make hundreds of dollars in an hour. And if you are someone whose body or mind or both need time to recover after working or after physical activity or after interacting with people, sex work can be really ideal for that, because you can make more money in 1 hour than you can in a week at a minimum wage job, or even several weeks, depending on where you live and what the minimum wage is. So that's one thing I'd say about it. Another thing I would say about it is that it is something that can frequently be done from home. And for many of us who are disabled, it is easier for us to work from home, pandemic or not. And there are many different types of sex work. It's not necessarily something that you do in person. It's not necessarily something that is what people might consider to be sexual. Sometimes it's a dominatrix. Sometimes it is fetish work. Sometimes it's, without getting too graphic, manual stimulation instead of intercourse. It can be all kinds of sexual activity, and this can be a lot more accessible for work for many people who are disabled. And then there are people who are disabled who see sex workers. And I've had the experience of meeting clients who share some of my disabilities. And so then we have a better understanding of each other and where we're coming from physically and therefore sexually. So yeah, I think it's definitely a reality that a lot of people don't like to think about, let alone talk about.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, yeah, as far as sex work too, though, there's more, things that, like camming, that's something to do from home. There's camming, there's exotic dancing. There is also even though I guess like phone sex, or is that still a thing? But yes, those are other forms of it. But one thing I have noticed, when studying or reading about like people who go see sex workers, people with disabled people who see sex workers, primarily a lot of it's focused on men, or penis owners, with centering like their wants or needs, because they are seen as who I guess has the money, or many other things. We can talk about patriarchy, we can talk about all those things, but but if you sit there and you read or you notice that these are, or if they're talking about like sexual surrogates or all of those type of things, I have seen you know, even if it's portrayed in the media, in movies or whatever, it's about men, you know, with disabilities. So I thought that that is an important, something that was important to notice and look at. But the thing is, oh, the other thing I wanted to say is, like, through, you know, having done research and being research this topic, disabled people have been involved with sex work basically since the beginning of time. I, you know, there is, I've, you know, been doing research and I'm writing actually an academic paper on this, but in China, in Imperial China, blind baby girls were sold to brothels and taught to play instruments. They were called sing-song girls, and but were also you know, made to do sex work, you know, when they got older. And there were many reasons that it was set up for blind people, but it was like a particular disability that was used for sex work. You know, part of it was, they said, oh, well, because their thinking was that a blind person would not be able to identify, you know, a customer, or would be more accepting, you know, because they would not, you know, be able to see, you know, visually, you know, react to or not react, you know, according to how someone looked. And also it was seen as, oh, this was an okay profession for people who were blind. So, you know, that it's kind of, and we're talking about, you know, like 1700s, 1800s, you know, and, you know, part of, you know, the 1900s. So it's not a sex work and disability. It's not new. It's just not something that, you know, we get to talk about a lot, particularly as, you know, some forms of sex work are not legal everywhere. But that if you look at where countries where it is legal, disability and sex worker and people with disabilities going to see sex workers is more of the thing. It's more talked about, and you're starting to see things like talking about like regulations and things like that.
Thank you, Caz and Robin, for sharing that insight on a question that society, like, it's not talked about. Like, so thank you for sharing that insight. We have about 5 minutes left. Does any of our panelists have like any last remarks that they want to touch on? Or we can. Marie, is there one more question that would be good to end on?
Yeah, I thought Jessica's question is a really good one to end on. Real quick, how do you guys recommend lowering the barriers to connecting with new potential sexual partners? And that's open for whoever wants to take it first.
It's also okay. It's also okay if no one wants to answer.
That is a hard one too, because it's like, what can we do as disabled souls really in this society that's already ableist? Like, you know, it's like we already existing is just enough. So it's like there's so much that's out of our power in a way.
Yeah. Exactly. If
I have just a thought, Whitney, if that's okay.
Yeah.
This is Spencer. I think one of the things that I try to do with my group of non-disabled friends is to have the conversation about sex a lot, to bring this to my friend group. In fact, I get teased a lot. They're like, you are way more sexual than everybody in this group. And I was like, I know, I hypersexualize myself sometimes on purpose to get the point across that like disabled folks are sexual and they do like to have sex. And it comes in all forms, and it's really beautiful. And so I think one of the ways that maybe we can start to lower the barriers is if we start to bring this to the community of people that we feel comfortable and safe with, to share these ideas and these thoughts and our feelings about how we experience the world, and specifically when it comes to sexuality.
This is Caz. Building on what Spencer said, finding people is kind of why I became a sex educator in a lot of respects, because I was finding myself doing a lot of educating on my own anyway. And it sort of developed into a scenario where people started asking me to come teach and come share my experiences and the things I'd learned over the years. And that we have to, as we've been discussing during this conversation, we have to have boundaries. We can't always be educating. But I think that we can set up situations where we know in our minds, like, I'm going to this party, or I'm going to be in this chat room, and I'm writing my dating profile, whatever it may be. And these can all be educational opportunities if we want them to be. And we have to make that decision for ourselves. You know, are we comfortable doing that educating in the whatever scenario it may be? Because maybe we don't want to talk about it at that time, and that's fine too. But when we do things like dating profiles, I like to be really upfront in mine and be like, this is what I have. This is where you can get information on it. And if you have questions, Google it, because I'm not here to answer all your questions. Because if I were doing that, I would just be answering people's questions all the time on dating profiles. That's all it is. So that would be where I would start, is if you're comfortable educating, there's nothing wrong in sharing your experience with other people.
I also find that there's there's different ways to educate too, utilizing like, for instance, I use social media. I use Twitter a lot of times to share maybe an article or something that I have thought about that that relates to disability and sexuality, or that from things from all over the world, as a matter of fact, because sexuality, disability, these are human conditions. And so looking at what people around the world and how they approach things and how they think about it, and these, for me, that's all important and part of learning and understanding what it means to be a sexual person, and understanding how that relates to disability, and and also like ideas and things like that.
Awesome. Well, we have about a minute left, so I would like to thank our 4 panelists for joining us today and sharing their own unique perspective. I would like to thank our interpreters for interpreting this event. And if you want to continue the conversation, you can join our Diversability Leadership Collective and get your first week free. Or there's our Facebook community that is free. And we hope to see you at our next Diversability Unplugged event. And thanks, everyone. I'll see y'all later. Bye.